Greenlight Network presents Football Time.
Hey, and welcome to the Football Time podcast. We're here for our college football preview. We're going to get into some Conference USA and all the former Conference USA teams in the AAC. Yep. Our man Dynamite David is with us once again to continue our college football preview series. Are you ready to get into some more college football previews, Dynamite?
I'll tell you what, I was anticipating college football this season, and the more I get into it, the more I dive into these conferences, the more excited I'm getting. And I'm ready for the season to get here. But first, we're going to get through all these conferences, and we're going to see what these two look like today.
All right, so we're going to kick it off. Conference USA, interesting conference. Couple of really solid teams. I wouldn't go elite teams, but I go solid teams in here. Ones you can't take lightly for sure. I think they're probably about 4 or 5 teams maybe deep in here, and then it really, really drops off on that back end there where we're getting into some territory where it's really, really bad. But I think those top maybe 4 or 5 teams really can play a little football.
Yeah, really top-heavy conference. I think top to bottom, if you count the whole conference as a whole, I think it's maybe the worst conference in the country. But there's a few good outliers there that I think – but I think there's going to be a lot of good money being made in this conference. Probably some good lines we're going to see, and I hope to capitalize on that this season.
Yeah, I think maybe like top-tier teams. We're talking about Marshall. We're talking about UAB, maybe UT San Antonio. Probably a little better than the top end of the MAC. But I think overall – especially the east side of the MAC, I think they're a little bit probably deeper than this bottom half of Conference USA, where it gets bad.
Yeah, it gets ugly
pretty quick.
Yep.
That being said, a lot of them do play well at home. A lot of good home field advantages for a lot of these teams. So let's dive into it, and let's dive into the favorites. Marshall Thundering Herd leading the way with an 8.5 win total here. They were really, really solid last year, 7-3. Their coach is no longer there. New coach. Really, that's about the only questions I have for them. I think defensively they will be really, really good. Will be a solid offense. Maybe a couple questions at running back, but I think you can find spots there. But definitely, probably the top tier talent wise in the Conference USA. What are you thinking on the Marshall Thunder and Herd?
I really like Marshall. I don't have them as my favorites. I've got them more as a 1B. We'll get to the other team I like here in a minute. But Marshall's really stacked. Pretty much the whole team from last year, for the most part, is coming back. A lot of expectations on this team. There's going to be a lot of pressure for a first-year coach. Normally, there's a grace period with a coach coming in. I think Charles Huff's going to be under a lot of pressure to perform with this team in year one. They've got really good defensive backs. They bring back first-team Conference USA and Stephen Gilmore, and they brought in Clemson transfer Leanthony Williams. So I think their defense is going to be really solid, and their offensive line. They're going to have a really strong offensive line. They're bringing back 3 3-year starters. So they have the most starts on their offensive line in Conference USA. So defense and offensive line wins championships.
Yes,
so.
That's probably where I'm so high on them. And that's where I sort of like running back questions. I don't worry, because it's a little plug and play if you have an offensive line like that, especially in the Conference USA, where they can just maul teams and really push them around both on offense and defense. Really like the quarterback, Grant Wells. Really think he's a really solid player. I went over on 9 wins on that 8.5 here. Schedule wise, I think it's pretty solid. Really the swing game might be that Appalachian State game, right at, really sort of weird Thursday night games, sort of midway into the season. I believe it's 4 or 5 games into the season. It just seems like a weird spot to have that game playing at Appalachian State. But I think that'll probably swing it. There are a couple other maybe tricky spots in there, probably at FAU late, Western Kentucky, the last game of the season.
I'll tell you what I like here on their schedule, beyond that road game at App State, they got UAB at home. They got Western Kentucky at home. They've got pretty much throughout the rest of the conference, other than at FAU, it's a pretty favorable conference schedule. So they've got that going for them too. But that App State game is going to be rough, but that doesn't factor into their Conference USA standings either.
That was the other thing. I think, conference wise at 270, I think it's a pretty decent value because you're only battling with about 2-3 other teams there. They seem to have the easiest schedule of the ones I've looked at. We'll get into UAB's ridiculous schedule probably pretty quick here. And then, if they can just navigate that Appalachian State game, I think they hit that 9-win mark pretty easy. I wouldn't be scared to put a bet on the Marshall over here. Because I didn't see a lot of trip ups other than maybe that at FAU game. And, then they can split, those games versus the elite teams in Conference USA and Appalachian State and hit that 9-win mark.
I've actually got them down with an L at App State.
Yes.
And still bottom bad year the rest of the way through, got them finishing 8-4. So I like the over here. I think at worst case scenario, you get that 8 right around near the push, but I'm going to take the over here as well.
Yes, I think that's pretty good value there. What did you think of the conference value plus 270?
Yeah, I really didn't jump on too much of the conference guys here just because I like to get the good value picks when I'm going to see what I can get. And there just wasn't a whole lot I liked here just because when you get down to the UAB and the UTSA, they're all sitting right around 200-300, which isn't normally the number I like to go for.
The only thing I put there is essentially it's a 3-to-1 value. I put maybe 3 teams that could win this conference right there.
Yeah.
The value's sitting there, but I don't know if I actively go on it, especially since it essentially ties up your money for 6 months out of the season. But, I really think this Marshall team will be really, really interesting to watch. I think that September 23rd game versus Appalachian State.
That'll be
a good one. Be interesting to watch that at Navy game. Little tricky spot. We'll get into Navy. I don't think they're as good as, they have been in the past, but it's always tricky to open up with an option team like that. We're going to move on to probably our second favorites in the Conference USA, and that's the UAB Blazers. Bill Lee returns once again with a great defense. I mean, we're talking really the interesting thing here is both Marshall and UAB, both pretty much totally built on defense. So it's not these options sort of spread teams, new age wise, these small schools. They're building defensive wise and sort of playing old school sort of style of football. And I just can't talk about how much I like Bill Clark. I just think he's a great head coach, just a complete winner. I mean, you saw it when the football team essentially went away for 2 years, brought them back, were expected to win like 1 game, ended up winning 8 games that year. And, he's good for 8 to 10 wins every year. He always has this team ready. The win total does sit at 7.5, and you look at that and they're like, why? And then you look at the schedule. Probably the weirdest thing I think I've ever seen to a football season. They essentially start out on the road 4 straight games to start out the year. I don't think I've ever seen somebody start 4 straight road games, and then after that 4 straight road games, they play a home game versus Liberty. So if they can sort of manufacture that start, I think they're okay. But I just had them barely going over it at 8 because I'd never seen anything like that, starting 4 games on the road like that.
I've got them penciled in for 3 out of those first 5 as W's. I think if they can manage that, I think they can get to that over and get 8 wins.
Yes.
But that's going to be tough. At Georgia is going to be really tough. I don't see that as a win. I've actually got that in as a loss, but I think they can get Jacksonville State, neutral site. I think they can win at North Texas, and I think they can win at Tulane. But that Liberty and Georgia game is going to be rough. Just being able to regroup after those and taking care of the ones on paper, and then even FAU at home after Liberty. That's not a lock either. But I really think the key to UAB's success is going to be if Tyler Johnson can stay healthy. We've seen the past 2 years he's been really good, but he's missed significant playing time both seasons, and they don't have a whole lot behind him as far as depth. So if he can't stay healthy, they're going to run into a lot of trouble. But good thing is, he's going to have protection. They've got all 5 starters back on the offensive line, and they've got Tyler Taylor, JUCO guy, that's going to be looking he's got some NFL potential at linebacker, so he's going to be anchoring their defense, I think. So I like UAB. I've actually got them as my 1A team in the conference. Now, as far as win totals with that non-conference schedule, they could probably potentially be lower than Marshall, but I think when it comes to conference win losses, they could be the top dog.
Yeah, that's exactly where I'm sitting here. Like, I'd not even like Jacksonville State, their opener is necessarily a lock win. Jacksonville State, very, very good subdivision team. Anybody who's watched them, I mean, that's going to be a tough game. I think they'll get that win, but then go into Georgia, North Texas, Tulane, Liberty. If they can sort of milk that schedule and come away with 1-2 losses, the back end of the schedule becomes much, much easier, and they get rewarded. And other than that game at Marshall, I think they can run the slate. Only question mark, really, they lost a lot of wide receivers. Now, this is a school that has sort of replaced wide receivers very, very well. So I don't look for that to be much of a problem. You mentioned Tyler Johnson's sort of injury history. If he can stay healthy with that offensive line, I think the receiver problems will be more than okay. And defensively, I'm looking forward to watching these guys play. I'm actually looking forward to that Georgia game because they'll be coming off that Clemson game. And if they don't take that serious, I don't think they can lose, but they might be in for a little bit more smash mouth than they wanted for the second game after coming to Clemson.
That'd be a swift fall for Georgia.
Yes,
two openers.
Yes, it would. All right. I didn't get into the conference odds there around Marshall's 300. Mm-hmm. Sort of same thinking as Marshall. There are probably 3 teams in there hovering around the top. Do you like those odds any more than you liked Marshall's?
The only thing I like, between those two is, Marshall gets UAB at home.
Yes.
So I think that could play a big factor there. But I think they're about the same. Like I said, 1A, 1B here, and now we're going to get to my sleeper team here.
Yeah, we are. All right, we're going to move on to Dynamite David's sleeper team. Now, the win total here, pretty high for me, but their schedule much easier than the UAB start. But UT San Antonio, 8 wins on the over-under here. Really, really good team. They built it pretty well. I have a couple question marks in there. Quarterback would be my main concern for UT San Antonio. If they can get solid quarterback play, I think they could be hovering around your 8-win mark. But I'm curious to see what we get out of UT San Antonio. It's been always sort of a little bit of a mixed bag for them. Expectations have come, and they've never quite lived up to them. But I think this is probably the best team they've had in quite a while.
Well, you want me to tell you why I like the Roadrunners here? I love the Roadrunners, and they're my pick to win the conference. I've got them plus 300 to win the whole thing. They've got 21 starters returning. 19 of those starters were coaches' all-conference team last year. The Sincere McCormick, freshman All-American running back, he broke the Roadrunner single game record twice last season, and all 4 running backs, including him, are all back. So all their rushing yards are back from last year. I think he's going to perform really great. And him combined with head coach Jeff Traylor, who was a running backs coach at Arkansas, SMU, and Texas, he's going to utilize that running back talent. And if they can get some improvement from their defense, which they have all 11 starters coming back. So I really like them. And now they do have some toss-up games. They've got a road game at Memphis that I've got circled, a road game at Western Kentucky, but they get UAB at home. And their non-conference isn't too bad. I think Illinois is the toughest non-conference game they've got. And I've kind of got that as a toss-up. I think they could go into Illinois and take them down.
Well, I was going to talk about their schedule here. I don't think I really had them penciled in for a loss, automatic loss, where I just write it down. They're probably losing that game. Out Illinois is a little tricky, but that Illinois program is pretty much just decimated right now. They're going to have to totally retool. So I think actually UT San Antonio has more experienced players coming in, and maybe even especially skill position wise on running backs and receivers. They're probably actually better than Illinois in those positions. The quarterback play is the one where you sort of get a little shaky, but defensively, I think they can hold up versus, a lower tier Big Ten team. So I look at that as a toss-up game. Really, their toughest games I had highlighted were in conference. They go at Memphis, at Western Kentucky, at Louisiana Tech. Those probably are the three sort of tricky ones that will determine their season. Can they win at a Memphis, at a Western Kentucky, at a Louisiana Tech? All really, really sort of tough places to play, all pretty solid teams. If they can hit that, they can definitely hit their over. I see where you like them. I went soft and I went push right at 8. So I couldn't quite distinguish where I was feeling. I saw that UNLV game also on there, and I couldn't decide whether I like UNLV or not. You always hear the noise coming out of UNLV, and then they win 2 games a year.
I've got them going 9-3, but I think where they finish with that home game against UAB next last week of the season and that road game at Western Kentucky, that's going to really determine where they finish in the conference. But I like them getting plus 300 for the conference.
Yeah.
And I like the over plus 100 getting some money there.
I couldn't pull the trigger on that one because I counted 8. I could see your high. I could also see your low. So I was I'm going to be a loser and push right at 8 on that one. I didn't love their championship odds at 3-1 because I definitely think there's probably I wouldn't say a huge drop, but Marshall UAB right there, then maybe a little drop where San Antonio might be able to jump in there, but maybe not quite as high level as Marshall and UAB. So I didn't like that 3-1, but they're on the real cusp of the 3 teams I think are definitely, there's a big drop off after UT San Antonio, I believe. I think some other teams could jump in there.
I've got one.
I think there's a drop off in talent.
I've got one more, I think, before we fall off.
One more before we think we really fall off. All right, we'll go on to our next one. And we're going to go down to Boca Raton. The Florida Atlantic Owls, Willie Taggart. In his second season here. I think the man's pretty much been all over Florida. I know he's been at South Florida. I know he's at Boca Raton now. And I believe he had a fun stay at Florida State for, I believe, about a year. So interesting team here. 7.5 wins seem pretty high for me. I did not see that. I really had him way under this. I just don't see quite the talent on this team, but they won 5 games last year, coming off a big 11-win season the year before, but I just think the talent's dropped off. So I'm curious where you sit because my number was way off on this.
Yeah, I think, Willie Taggart needs that offense he can utilize for the way he likes to play. And the biggest talent this team has coming back is defensive talent. They really don't have many offensive pieces here. Quarterbacks are kind of so they've got decent running backs, but their receivers are awful. And their line's not great. Really tough road schedule. I think they've got Florida on the road, Air Force on the road, UAB on the road, and Western Kentucky on the road. And I just don't I don't see them going in and getting wins, those road wins. And they host Marshall. I think that's another loss. But I'm just not big on this team. Not just yet. I think it might take another year or two for them to turn around. But I'm definitely going under here by at least a couple games.
Yeah,
under that
I think Willie Taggart will find talent here. I just think there's a little bit of a drop here from the teams that they've had, where they've had a couple of guys who have been really, really good high-level players, NFL low-level, to a couple real NFL starters. But I just don't see it on this team. You spoke defensively, they probably will be pretty solid, but I don't think they're up there with the teams we just talked about in Marshall, UT San Antonio, or UAB. I think there's a drop defensively there. I think their defense is solid. They got some playmakers, but I don't think they have the stingy-like defense that these 3 teams we talked about before, and they're sitting at the win totals the same area as theirs. And actually, I thought their schedule was pretty tough. You open at Florida, that Georgia Southern game. That's a very good Georgia Southern team. Mm-hmm. They play an option. That's not going to be fun to play the second week coming off at Florida. Going to Air Force, once again, another option team up in the cold mountain air. I'm not sure that's going to be all that fun for those guys out of Boca Raton. And then at Western Kentucky in conference, at UAB, you get Marshall. It just seems like I didn't see 8 wins there. So I was way down on them. I had them under and had them hovering around like 5 wins. So
Yep, that's what I've got them down for 5 as well.
So that's why I was so stunned at the number being so high. But I couldn't talk myself into it. And speaking of that, conference odds at plus 600,
No.
I was no way there. I didn't see really any value at all in Florida Atlantic. So 7.5 wins. I don't think they get there. I'm a little down on the Owls of Florida Atlantic. We'll move on. I think we're going to go to a team both you and I both liked a little bit last year, a little sneaky, probably not totally on the win-loss record, but they were fun to bet on when they were getting points because that defense was really stingy, but they did lose a lot of their guys from, they're one of those teams that didn't hold over a lot of those, I guess we're calling them super seniors or whatever, but they're at 5.5 wins, but I do think they also bring back, once again, will be pretty solid on defense. And I really love their quarterback. So I'm curious where you sit on Western Kentucky.
I'm a big fan of Tyson Helton, and I think some roster turnover may be good in this case because he's going to get more of his guys in there. Big fan of Billy Zappi. I think he's gonna do really well in that offense, and I think they're gonna thrive. I actually really like Western Kentucky, and I've got them plowing through their schedule pretty good. Tough road game at Michigan State, but I think it's winnable. I've got that as a toss-up. They host Indiana as well. So I think if they can make it past that non-conference 2-2 at worst, I think they can get in there and get some momentum going into the Conference USA schedule. I really like them. Big game to finish up the season on the road at Marshall. But I just think this offense is going to be really potent.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. I think they will be good. And this is actually the team I had above Florida Atlantic. I have them on 7 wins here on the 5.5 on the over. So I think they'll be really better than what people think they will be. I enjoyed their sort of crescendo through the year, as they sort of bottom out there after Braum left, and then they've sort of built back up piece by piece. So I just really like this team. I think there's a lot of solid talent that they in that area too that they can recruit from. So a good sort of second tier, small school team. I say small school; they're a pretty big school. But
I've got them worst case scenario going 8-4, but I've actually picked them to go 10-2.
Do you?
I think they're going to be a 10-win team.
Yeah. I had a couple of questions on their schedule. The second week they go to Army. I don't, you never know with that, how they're going to deal with the option going to Army.
Army's not going to score more than 14
That's
points.
Correct. But they might hold the ball the whole time while scoring that 14 points. And then really the only concern about something like a 10-2 season was that end of the schedule. The middle, pretty easy after you get past Indiana. I mean, I'm not even Michigan State. I put that as probably a pretty even game. I don't see much out of Michigan State this year, but that last little stretch where they're at Rice, FAU, at Marshall, that's a bit tricky there to close the season. But I think, like you think, if they come in, with maybe one loss, they can probably split that and have a 10-2 season. So Western Kentucky, I think we're both pretty high on that 5.5 over.
I didn't mention, I actually, we were talking about conference odds.
Yes.
I like the 1,000.
Well, I was going to ask, are you big on that 1,000? That one's a little
I like
more
that 10,
nice.
10-1 is really good.
10-1, a little more nice, especially when you think they're probably the 4th best team. And actually, we both believe they're the 3rd best team in there. So getting 10-1, I think Western Kentucky could be a pretty decent bet there, both conference-wise. But I think we're both big on that 5.5 over. I think they both hit that pretty easy. I think they easily, even if they have like a bad year, get to 7 wins. So pretty low number for a team I think we both think will do well. We'll move on to probably the team that we were most interested in. We couldn't quite place them. We didn't know if to make them good, to make them bad, or what to do with them. But we're moving to the Rice Owls. lot of birds of prey flowing through this conference
Well,
here.
I like these owls better than the ones in Florida
Yeah.
Atlantic. And I was big on this team in basketball, and I really, really want to like this football team.
Yes.
There's a lot I like about this team, but I just look at their schedule, and it is probably the most brutal non-conference schedule I see in Conference USA.
That's why their win total is at 6 wins. And you're not going to like me here, but guess what? I pushed right at 6 wins. A lot of pushes in the Conference USA conference, but my sort of notes on this team were don't do anything great, but don't do anything bad. They're sort of just a solid football team. I don't think they can beat elite teams, but I don't think they will lose to the bad teams in Conference USA. So I just didn't quite know where to put them. Win totals at 6. I sort of counted 6 wins, so I'm curious where you came in on that.
Well, they're well coached, but it's hard to get that elite talent to a school with high standards such as Rice, and this schedule's tough. I wanted to have them hitting the over here. I've got them going between 5 and 7 to 6 and 6.
Yes.
So I'm going to take the push as well here. I think they fall right in on that number. I don't really like the over or under. If I had to pick one, I would take the under here just because their schedule is so unfavorable. They've got at UTSA, at UAB. They host Western Kentucky, but I think that's a loss too. At Texas, Houston, Arkansas, and really the only winnable non-conference game they have is Texas Southern.
Yeah, that's what I put one true win on the schedule where I was like, they will definitely win that game. And my main concern on this Rice team is if you look at their schedule at Arkansas, Houston, at Texas, Texas Southern, Southern Miss, at UT San Antonio, at UAB. I mean, theoretically going to that North Texas game, they might have one win. I mean, you think they beat Southern Miss, but it could very easily be like a 1-17 going into that back end of the schedule. And then you get to that back end, and I think they could probably roll through that other than maybe a home game versus Western Kentucky, which will be a little bit of a toss-up. But if you're going 1-6, 1-7, what does your motivation become?
Yeah,
then?
exactly.
Especially when you've just been sort of beat up for the first 6-7 games of your schedule. That at UT San Antonio, at UAB, essentially to open your conference season, just seems like a big whammer. So I think we're both just confused with the Rice Owls. So we went with our 6 push. All right, we'll move next to the aforementioned Southern Mississippi. More birds of prey, the Golden Eagles. Their win total also sits at 6. Now, I didn't like Southern Miss all that much. I was a little down on them. I'm curious what your thoughts on Southern Miss were coming into this season.
I think they're going to be a little bit better. They had a really rough go of it last season, losing their coach, 2 games into the season, and then losing their interim coach another week after that. It was just pretty much hard to salvage anything from that. But I think they've got some decent talent coming back. And I like their new coach they got in Will Hall. I think he's a good offensive coordinator, a good offensive mind here, and he may be able to get some excitement going at Southern Miss.
Yeah, I don't know if they totally restocked to play at a level where they can get over the 6 wins, and that would be my concern. But I will say I do like Frank Gore Jr. Yeah. So when you can hand him the rock, I think this is right at the middle point where teams under Southern Miss are really, really bad. Southern Miss might be able to beat all the really, really bad teams. I don't know if they can quite step up to the level of the teams we've probably discussed the last, 4 or 5 teams. But I'll be very interested to see what the new coach does, Will Hall. I also think he probably will be a pretty solid coach. And then, you got Frank Gore Jr., hand him the rock, ride him, and see if you maybe could spring a win or two. Because I did have them at 5 wins. Yep. So you're right off that 6 number. So maybe they sneak one in there and then you're going over. I really didn't know what to do with that Troy game. Really confused me. I think it confused me when we went over Troy last time. So just didn't know quite where to put them.
Well, I've got them. I think they're kind of right around the same talent level, maybe a little bit better offensively than Rice. Yeah. But I think their schedule's a little bit more favorable in Rice. So I think if one of these 2 teams is going to pull the over, I think Southern Miss is more likely. Yeah. But like you said, that Troy game's a big question, and they play at Rice,
Yes.
so that could be a big swing game. But I think they can. I think they can beat like the bottom 4 or 5 teams in this league. But again, I like the push here. But I'd be more inclined to take the over here than the under.
I think probably what concerned me is all the sort of beatable teams on their schedule. They were all going to. You mentioned at Rice.
Yep.
You mentioned at like UT San Antonio, at Louisiana Tech, at Middle Tennessee State. Those are all teams you think they'll be able to play with, and they're going to, and you just don't want to really gamble on those kind of games where some teams going on the road to win a conference game, especially in these parks, because a lot of these teams have really, really good home field advantage. It's tough to go on the road to win, especially on, I think a handful of these games will be Thursday, Friday night, nooners.
Well,
and that's never fun.
And now that we've dropped down to this bottom tier of the conference, which I think is, the 2/3 of the conference is the bottom level, I think we're going to get a lot of cannibalization, teams winning ones they're not supposed to, teams losing ones they're not supposed to. And that's going to really get a clear distinction between those top 4 and the bottom half. So it's going to get really murky once you get past.
Well, I was going to say, I don't even know if I'm balanced here on my over unders, because I was just going through and trying to remember who I had cannibalizing who in this little bunch here. I'm like, did I have them winning this game or did I have them winning this game? So at some point I was just like, whatever. We'll see what I think the number is and see if it's pretty good. We'll move on to our next team. We'll go further down south and go to Louisiana Tech. Skip Holtz back again for, I think, his 9th or 10th year. Always a pretty solid team. I don't think they've ever, really been great, but, they're pretty much 7 to 10 wins every year. Their total sits 4.5 wins this year. I was a little disappointed in them last year. I thought they'd be a little better. They were not. I went over this and my note has one word: law. I don't see a ton of talent on offense. I don't see a ton of talent on defense, but they win their games. And speaking of home field, it's very difficult to go into Louisiana Tech and win games. So they always have that home field advantage. So the number 4.5, I was like, they kind of win 5-6 games, even if they're really, really bad.
Well, they've got a really good offensive line, but I don't see any spectacular skill position guys that are going to make any explosive plays. Okay quarterback and Luke Anthony. May be able to get it done. I've got them right at 4 wins, so I'm going to be taking the under here.
I had them.
I think
6.
I think the swing game for them going over could be that hosting Southern Miss. The next last game.
I think that was where I was like, their final 3: Charlotte, Southern Miss, at Rice.
Those can go either way.
That will determine whether they hit that over, they hit that under. And I was like, Skip always has them, somewhere in there. They hit their 6, and that's why I was probably a little higher on them than Southern Miss, because I trust them because they've done it for so long at hitting their number. And I just thought 4.5 seemed low. Even if I don't like their talent, they win games, and they should win their home games that are not versus the elite of this conference. So we're going to go next, really drop down.
We're getting to the ugly ones now.
Now, granted, I always have had a soft spot for this team since they moved in to the Division I ranks, but they've always been pretty bad, other than some fun offenses from time to time. So Old Dominion, 3.5 wins. I just don't see a lot of talent on this roster. I don't see much on here. They're coming off a terrible year where they were 1-11. Usually they could find a way to win 4, 5, 6 games and have a couple fun ones where they throw up a 60 on you. That did not occur last year. So what can Ricky Rain do in year 2?
I am hammering the under here as hard as I can. I think at most they get 2 wins. They have nothing. They have a good wide receiver, but that's really all I can point to on their team that's any kind of good. They just really struggled. Not a whole lot of experience coming back. Only 3 defensive starters returning this year, and they're just going to get obliterated. I see Hampton. I've got that penciled in as a win, and just other than that, I'm looking through their schedule and I just don't know. Maybe UTEP
Well,
I think that's going to be the battle for the basement there.
Yeah,
So,
that I had 3 games they could win on their schedule: Hampton, at UTEP, Charlotte, and I went under 2 because I don't know if they're going
No.
to UTEP and winning, especially since I assume that game will be at noon.
when they
in
have to hit
El
the
Paso.
4 to hit that
Yes.
over, and they're not going to get
Yes.
4 wins.
And that I was really shocked it was that high. I didn't know if Wake Forest was really, really bad. I will admit I haven't gotten into my Wake Forest previewing, but I was like, Wake's usually in that 8-win mark and sneakily contending for the crappy side of the ACC. So I just didn't quite understand that 3.5. I went under 2 wins here. I just don't see it this year, and I didn't like what I saw last year. So I'm a pretty solid under, even on something as low as 3 wins on Old Dominion here. All right, we'll move on to our next one. North Texas, the Mean Green out of North Texas here. Their win total sits at 4 wins. I want to like this team. Once again, this is one of my always sort of, I kind of like them.
Yep.
But the only thing I saw on this team was a quarterback.
Yeah, they got probably one of the best in the conference.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I think they might have the best quarterback in the conference. The problem is I don't think anything else is the best, and it all might be bordering on the worst, including their offensive line. So I just don't know what we're getting out of the Mean Green. That being said, if you have a really elite quarterback in a conference like this, maybe they sneak some games out. I went under. I'm curious where your thoughts are.
I was hovering right at that 4-win total. I think if I had to pick, I'm going to go under here, and simply because they have nothing in the trenches. Both offensive and defensive line are really struggling. They've got some tough non-conference games at Missouri, and they're hosting Liberty. Those are definite losses for sure, and I don't think this quarterback can carry them by himself to 5 wins.
Yeah, that I was more concerned if he gets hurt. You're really dropping down to really bad territory. So I went under as well. I went 2 wins on them as well. I think you're seeing where I think all the wins are at that top. I think they're going to beat up on these teams really, really good. So look for the quarterback play. If he becomes really, really elite, they might sneak a couple more wins, but I don't think they can hit that number. So I'm staying away. I thought 4 was just way, way too high. Next up, we're going to move to Middle Tennessee State. It's an interesting year for Middle Tennessee State. Rick Stockstill in his 16th year there. He's been there a while. Technically, I think they've underachieved a little bit for his career. They've had some loaded teams, and they never seem to win quite as many games as I think they should. A couple I thought have been really disappointing, but this is not one of those better teams.
Well, we just talked about North Texas struggles online, and Middle Tennessee, I think, the struggles even more.
Yes.
Their offensive line is absolutely atrocious. I think Middle Tennessee's had some good years. I think they're in the past. I think Stockstill could be on the hot seat this year.
Yes, I had that in my notes. I was like, if this goes as bad as I think it is going to, because I had them under 3 wins here. And
I've got the under as well. I think this is the worst team they've had in a while. Typically, they're kind of up there in that level Louisiana Tech is at. But they've fallen back, and now they're at the bottom of the pack, and I think it could potentially cost him his job.
Well, that was the other thing. I had them under 3, and that was given that Connecticut win, which I assume it will get, but going at Connecticut in mid-October on a Friday, I'm not 100% sure that's going to be that fun a game to play. We'll be sure to tune in that one. Be sure to watch Winning Daily, as both me and Dynamite make a pick on that Friday night game, but I would be concerned, really. This might be it if Rick, goes really bombs out here. So I look for a pretty down year at Middle Tennessee.
We're flying through these bottom teams.
We are
under.
Well, there's not a lot to talk about on these teams. Middle Tennessee didn't even have a good quarterback. They have an okay one. We'll go next. This one I'm a little intrigued with, but
It'll be fun to watch.
I go under again. The Charlotte 49ers. I always like this team. Really like Will Healy. My notes were as with previous teams, defense always a question mark. Looks to be poor again.
I think it's the worst defense in the conference. They've got good quarterback play. Their offense is actually really exciting.
They're back in the good old days. Charlotte and Coastal Carolina used to play each other and would literally play 70, 60 games. No one would play defense, but they were very interesting to watch. A lot of explosive plays out of there.
Yeah, but I think if they're going to get any of these wins to get on this over, they're going to have to play some defense, and I just don't see it happen. I'm going to hit another under here.
Yeah,
well.
Sadly, I went under. I tried very, very hard, and I think I was being kind and giving them 4 wins.
I've got them at 3.
I wanted to very, very badly. I wanted to at least get to that push territory. I don't think I could get to the push territory. I think I was being kind at the 4. Really, if I didn't have such a kind heart for Charlotte, I probably would bet on this under, because I think 5's just a little bit too high. But they are entertaining to watch. So if you're bored, they will play a lot of games during the week. Tune in. Fun to watch.
That Duke game on a Friday could be interesting.
Yeah, David might put up a 70 on it, but he might give up 40. So we'll move on. I think this is my most curious team towards the bottom of the pack here. Butch Davis returns for his 5th year. I don't know if when he got hired, we thought Butch would be there for a 5th year. I think he was going to try to use this to springboard into a bigger job, but he returns. Mixed results, really. A couple good years in there. Last year was really, really bad. I don't know what you read into last year's. Their number sits at 4.5. I thought it was a little low, but their schedule's pretty tough. I'm curious where you think Florida International sits.
Well, if they can avoid losing to an FCS team, that'd be good. They had a rough one last year to Jacksonville State. Yes. But this is another one. I've actually got them kind of around the same boat I've got Florida Atlantic.
Yes.
I think these are very similar teams. I like Butch Davis, and I think they can get some kind of offense going. Their defense is solid, but offensive line's good. It's the skill positions. Can they get somebody coming out?
Well, that's what I was. I think their line's good. I think their defense is solid. I wouldn't call it great. I don't think they'll be able to stop good teams, but I think they can hang with those bottom tier teams. Definitely stop them. But I moved them over because I assume they could find skill position guys. I mean, they're sitting, dead in a heartbeat of literal every grocery clerk down there was probably once a skill position guy that was probably pretty good at some point in time. So I know they don't have them on the roster, or we don't know they have them. At least we haven't seen them, but I'm assuming they could find a handful of skill position guys. Like I said, that offensive line is really, really probably the best thing they have on that team. So I went over here. I went over to 6 wins. Now, I was juicing it up and probably giving them a couple wins they might not get, but I definitely could see it on their schedule. I thought their schedule was pretty soft. The only real loss is at Texas Tech.
There's a bunch of ones that you can look at and flip a coin.
Yes, that's the at Central Michigan game. I probably gave them a loss, but I wouldn't be like the biggest stunner in the whole world if they went to Central Michigan and won.
FAU or FAU.
That's a toss-up. Charlotte at home.
Southern Miss.
The at Middle Tennessee, at Southern Miss games, I thought would be the turner. If they could, sort of sweep those 2 road games in conference teams, they're probably a little bit more talented then, but depending on how the season goes, can they get those? Can they get over the 4, get to the 6, or do they sort of just, wow. And how do they come off 0-5 year last year?
I've actually got them over as well. I've got them at 5 wins. I think they're going to get just over. I don't have them quite up at 6 as like you, but I think they're going to be right in that 5 win, just like FAU. They're going to be right in that middle tier, I think.
The 4.5, I wish it was 4. If it was 4, I'd bet it really heavy because I think they're guaranteed, 4 wins. But to go that 5-6, it's just going to be a little tricky. It sort of depends how injuries in the season unfolds. Be interesting to watch them. And last but not least, the UTEP Miners. I think this is probably the worst talented team on the Conference USA, but I think their schedule's pretty easy. And their defense, I will say, is not the worst in Conference USA. So I actually have them going over those 3 wins, basically on their pretty soft schedule. But I'm curious where you see Utah.
I've got them at 3, just under.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is another hot seat situation. I think Dana Dimmel is really close to being out. He's had 2 1-win seasons. I think did a little bit better last year, but my thing is if you fire him, where are you going to go? I think they're kind of in a no-win situation here, but I don't see them getting the over. I see them getting right at 3.
Yeah, I pushed it to 4. I just thought there are a handful of toss-up games at New Mexico State to go to the New Mexico game. I just don't know what to read into those. So, that's just bad football all around, and probably some random fumble or very bad play on some special teams is probably deciding those games. So, I sort of pushed that they probably had at least like 5 winnable games on there. Do they win all 5? I don't know, but there were 5 on there. The number sits at 3. I'm not overly impressed with their talent. I don't think they're a very good team. They will probably get murdered by the likes of Boise State and UAB. But I think when they're playing those bad teams, they might be able to at least keep themselves in games. But yeah, you mentioned the coach probably hovering on the hot seat. So if they're sitting in a bad place in the middle of the season, I think that's going to be, shut down city. All right, that's Conference USA. I think we'll move on to the old school Conference USA.
There we go.
And on to the AAC. So
no divisions anymore.
No divisions anymore.
Connecticut has moved on.
Connecticut has moved on. I don't know if they moved on. I think they were pleasantly let go. But we'll move on to the AAC fun conference. I really like AAC, and I really like watching AAC football. I loved watching it for a while. This is just sort of a emergence of really good teams that couldn't find a conference, and some leftovers from the old, Southwest Conference. So I'm very interested to see how this one plays out, and we'll kick it off right at the start with the Cincinnati Bearcats, sitting at 10 wins. That's a lot of wins, not a lot of margin for error. Probably, I'd say one of the 5 best defenses in college football.
Yeah, and I love their quarterback in Ritter. I think he's underrated. I think he performed really well last year, didn't get enough attention that he deserved. And the Cincinnati team, I thought, got kind of a bad rap last year. I thought they were one of the better teams in the country. And this season, I think it's going to be a really, really a good year for Cincinnati. I look at that November 12th matchup.
Yes,
at UCF. I'm excited about that. But and even that opener against Miami of Ohio, I think that even could be an interesting one.
Well, I think we'll see. Really, my only question on them is sort of explosiveness. They're a pretty buttoned down team. They don't take a lot of chances. I know you probably are living on Cincinnati teams from 10 years ago that didn't play any defense, scored a ton of points. This is pretty much the complete reverse. They're pretty buttoned up. They play a pretty tight offensive style. I do think the quarterback, it might be better to let him open it up a little bit. But their defense is so good. I don't know if you can even take chances with it, and you just drag their wins. That game at Indiana, at Notre Dame, that 2-week, well, it's actually a 3-week stretch because they have a bye week, but those 2 games right there pretty much determine if this team maybe can leap into that mix of, maybe slip into the playoffs. I'm not 100% sure they will let them in. They probably could go 12-0 and beat every Big Ten team, and they might still find an excuse not to let them in.
I think with the right scenario, we could see a team in the playoffs out of the AAC this year.
Yes, but I think Cincinnati's sort of a big enough profile to where they might I'll let them in if they can get that win at Indiana, at Notre Dame, and then Indiana would go on and probably be the second, third best team in the Big Ten. You mentioned that game in October versus Central Florida. Should be a really, really burner game. Conference-wise, the only ones I see that are really, really tricky, they somehow get a nice little beat here, home road games at Navy. Maybe a little tricky, but Navy I don't think is very good this year. At Tulane, Willie Fritz always has his guys there. Once again, that's sort of going back-to-back option offenses, which is never all that fun. But, at USF, at East Carolina, those are nice road games to have for the AAC when you might hit a couple more teams that we're going to get into that would be much tougher games to hit.
Yeah, I think not getting Houston's a big plus. But I look at this, I think that UCF game is 50-50. Other than that, I've got them running the table in the conference schedule. I think they could split between Indiana and Notre Dame. So I'm actually going to take the over here. I think they're going to make it out of this regular season with just one loss.
Yeah, I went under, but it wouldn't be an under bet I'd make. I think that actually that 10-win number probably about perfect. They probably split an Indiana Notre Dame game. You have a toss-up game with Central Florida there, and then the other game in conference I stared at. Though SMU is going there, SMU might be a little tricky, especially towards that end of the year. You never know where health and stuff lies. So I think we're both on the same page here. You went over, I went under, but I think we both are
right around that 10.
Right where we think they're going to be on that 10-win mark. Conference-wise, I didn't see any value here at minus 200. That is not worth any time, especially as I think there's probably a little bit of a line after Cincinnati, but I think there are 3 or 4 teams in there that just as easily could hop in there. And if you're having to pay money to win, I'm not sure that's great value, especially if it's being held up for 5 months. So we'll move on to the next team in this conference.
I'm big on this team.
Yeah, I think we're both big on this team.
Yep.
Well, I've always been big on this team. So really, probably the best team in Florida for the last 10 or so years, if you want to start looking at things. So anyway, Central Florida, 9.5 wins. Yep. A lot of wins just right off Cincinnati, but actually I thought their schedule bounced pretty easy as well, just like Cincinnati. And they don't even necessarily have those 2 tricky games at Indiana, at Notre Dame. There's where the first one is, of course, the big one, Boise State. That'll be there. And then at Louisville, there's no telling. One year they were good. The next year they were bad, but they're coached well. So no telling what you're getting from that. But conference-wise, I thought they got a nice little schedule here.
I think you've got three toss-up games on their schedule: Boise State, Cincinnati, and SMU.
Yes.
With both that Cincinnati and SMU games being on the road. But I think there's a high potential for them to run the table and potentially get into the conference championship game, which I see as being a rematch against Cincinnati. Yes. But I could see this UCF team going undefeated. I really like Gus Malzahn coming into this situation. He's really good at implementing his system quickly, and I think this is a very talented roster, and I'm interested to see what he can do.
Yeah. The only notes I have on here that would be sort of downfalls, they probably need to retool a little bit at wide receiver. But like we talked about, I mean, they will retool at wide receiver. And, in 4 months, we'll be talking about, the next guys that have come up from Central Florida that are great wide receivers. We just don't know them yet. So that doesn't concern me too much. As always, a little bit the defense, but they've been able to force turnovers for so long on the defensive end. That sort of balances things out. If they can continue doing that, I think this will be an elite team. Last year, they didn't do it quite as well, which is why they sort of dropped to 6-4. But we were talking about it earlier. I mean, I think every one of those games was like a 1-score game. They blew a couple of them. So, it just a weird year last year. But
all 3 losses last year within 1 score. So they were right there.
Yeah. I went over right at 10. I think them and Cincinnati right there, pretty much on the exact same way.
I really like this over here. I think they get at least 10.
Yeah, definitely. So will be fun to see what Gus Malzahn does there, especially when he probably wins more games than Auburn will this year. And funny enough, they're playing the coach that replaced him his team. So fun little 6 degrees of separation there. We're going to go next to probably our most interesting team. We loved them last year.
I really enjoyed them. I picked them quite a bit,
Yes.
I think.
Tulsa,
Yeah.
6 wins on the year. This sits dead in the middle. I couldn't find where to put this. I think their defense will be very good. Now, granted, they lost 2 very elite defensive guys.
They lost Zaven Collins, a first-round draft pick
Yes.
linebacker. I think he was the quarterback of
Yes.
their defense. I think that's a big loss. And I just, they were bad for 2 years prior to last
Yes.
year. They had a good season last year in a very weird year.
Yes.
Is that an outlier, or is that trend going to continue this year?
Yeah, that's the other thing with this team. If you follow their trends, they win 8, they win 3, they win 11, they win like 2. It's just it's always, you never know totally what you're going to get. So I tried to figure, where do we sit here? I think their defense will still be good. It might not be as elite level, but I think it probably won't be like Cincinnati's level, but I think it will be a very solid defense where they still can shut down a lot of these other teams in the AAC. Offensively, that's where my question mark
Lost
is.
their starting quarterback.
Lost their starting quarterback. We don't know what that is, but maybe the guy who replaces him is good. It's an unknown.
Yeah.
And that's where I get a little nervous because I don't know unknown. But I do think some of their skill position guys are pretty, I wouldn't call them like explosively great, but I think they're solid. So it was just really hard for me to get a read on this. I went over 7, but I have no confidence where this team will lie.
I'm taking the under here. I look at that schedule, that at Oklahoma State, at Ohio State. I think even that home game against Arkansas State could be tricky. They've got at Cincinnati, the big 50-50 game that could be a decide if they go over under is that at Tulane.
Yes.
I think they're right around the same talent level, but I'm going to go under here.
Yeah, I think that was probably where I didn't know what to do with them. I might have gone over just because a lot of their big games are at home. That might have pushed me over the edge. Maybe they steal 1 or 2 of those because they're home games. But, you could easily tell me they're going to win 4 games. They're going to win 3 games. You could tell me they're going to win 7 games. They're going to win 8 games. I just don't know quite where it falls. Hard team to read, but I do think their defense will be solid. So I don't think they'll have trouble with the sort of lower end teams of the AAC. So I think they will win those. I just don't know if they can sort of squeeze wins out of like they did. They got a couple wins last year versus a couple of the really good teams in the AAC.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if they can do that again this year. All right, next up, one of the powers of the AAC, the Memphis Tigers, and they sit at a pretty high win total as well. 8 wins for the Memphis Tigers here. A little bit different of a Memphis team. They're going to be based on their defense.
Yeah, it's going to be.
I don't know if they're running attack, which probably is not going to be all that great, which has probably been good for about 15 years now as they keep unloading backs into the NFL. But I do like their quarterback. I think their defense will be good. I'm curious where you see these guys sitting.
This is not the Memphis I've come to learn and know over the past 10 years.
Yes,
they're a little different. But I'm really not big on this Memphis team. I think they're going to have a lot of trouble. I've actually got them losing to the Roadrunners in week 4 UTSA. Mississippi State's tough. I think at Arkansas State could be tough. I don't like the schedule. I don't think they've got quite enough to repeat the success they had last year, going 8-3.
Yes.
I think it was. I don't think they're going to get there, and so I've definitely got them going under the 8 wins.
Yeah, I had to admit I had them under 2. I have them right around probably 7-8 wins. I think that's. I probably lean more towards the under. That's why I went 7. I thought their schedule was really, really difficult. The Nicholls State game aside, going to Arkansas State, I think that'll be a win, but that's not an easy place to play. That's also a sort of rivalry game. Mississippi State, I don't pencil it necessarily as a loss till we see what Mississippi State is. But, that'll be a tough game. You talked about UT San Antonio. At Temple is never a fun place to play because I guarantee you that's going to be a noon game in an empty NFL arena. And let me tell you, many of teams have been tricked up by the Temple noon game in an empty NFL arena. So at Temple, then they go at Tulsa, at USF, at Houston. It really is a difficult schedule. So I think the talent's there. We'll see if it comes together. It's hard to wrap your head around a Memphis team that's been so dominant offensively for the last 5 years. It's totally sort of going to flip-flop here. Their defense is going to be really solid. I don't know how well they're going to run the ball. I do like their quarterback. I think they will be able to hit, plays in the passing game, but it's more of a wait and see to where this team falls. I don't think they're quite on the level to maybe be in that top mark. And I think the odds reflect it here at 900.
Yeah.
I just don't think that's probably a bet I'm willing to make. I don't think I bet on the under, but I don't know if they can hit that 8-win mark. All right, we're going to go to the University of Houston. Dana Holgorsen has essentially pulled the Philadelphia 76ers and tanked for 2 years to try to get this team to this level.
Well, he's had transfers. He's had transfers sit. He's had red shirt and give up on seasons to save their eligibility. But they've been through some rough patches here. So I think he's kind of gotten a pass here. He's not going to get a pass this year.
Well, that's what I was going to say. This sits at 8.5. I have them going over. I think they will be really good. But it also doesn't stun me. One, I don't love Dana Holgorsen. I think he's sort of I thought he underachieved at West Virginia, let's just say.
I think he could have some success in this conference.
Yes.
And I think we're going to see what he can really do this year. I think he's kind of pretty much just cashed in on these last 2 seasons and really banking on a lot of these returning guys that have sat out the past couple of years. And I'm actually really big on Houston this year. I think they could be right there below Cincinnati and UCF at the top of this conference and maybe even get an upset here or there. So I'm definitely going to take the over the 8.5 here. And I actually like the value at 1,400.
Well, that's what I was going to say. They have essentially pulled the Sixers and tanked 2 years to build this team up for this season. A lot of pressure's in on Holgorsen because I think if they do bad, he's probably going to get the boot. But I have them at 10 wins. I think they're going to be really good. I think they can contend with both the Central Florida and Cincinnati. I think this is the other team that sort of jumps up there at the top of the AAC. I have them going over that. I love the value at 14-1 here. If I was making conference bets, that would be one of the ones I actually wouldn't mind my money holding because they do have the championship game. So if they get to that championship game, you can sort of manipulate yourself where you're always winning money there. And at 14-1, really, really good value. Weirdly enough, I still think their skill positions might be a little weak. I think their defense will be really good. I think their quarterback is really good, but I don't know if they're going to be quite as explosive enough to sort of be able to threaten a Cincinnati. That would be where I get a little nervous. They might be able to threaten like a Central Florida, but to score points on a Cincinnati, that makes me a little nervous. I did think their schedule also broke out pretty nice.
Well, they're not playing Cincinnati or Central Florida.
Until the championship game.
So what I think would be really frustrating is if you have a 1-loss Cincinnati, a 1-loss UCF, and an undefeated Houston in the conference that goes to the championship game and knocks off one of those two, and then you have a 1-loss team kind of sitting there in limbo. But I think Houston could be right there with them.
Yes. A couple tricky games I saw in there. I think that at Tulane on a Thursday going to be a little difficult. They should be able to handle it, but that's never fun. And then USF at USF, probably not a fun game to go to, even though I think we'll talk.
I think another team that could challenge them is SMU.
Yes, I think SMU. I just didn't have that quite penciled in because I figured that one home game, they'll be a little bit safer. All right, we're going to get to our boys at Tulane, the Green Wave. Willie Fritz, favorite of mine, always a solid coach, 6-7 wins every year. They're at 5 wins.
Boy, they can run the ball.
They can run the ball. And sadly, I'm way under on this one.
Really?
very difficult for me to say. I think you know how much I like Tulane. I think I've been telling you, Tulane's always tricky.
Yeah, I
Don't
suppose.
bet on them. And then this year, I just looked at their schedule. Their schedule is not easy.
This is one of those teams that is always right around 500.
Yes.
They're 6-6, 7-6, 6-6, 5-7, 6-6 year in, year out. So it's really tricky, especially when you look at that over under sitting at
Yes.
5. I'm gonna give them the over. I think they're gonna get to the 6. I think they're solid enough, and I think they're gonna get enough of those 50-50 games, and win probably 2 of their 4 non-conference games, and I think they can get there.
Yeah, I think this is why it hurt me so much. Being so down on them this year, I wouldn't bet on it because they do end up winning 5-6 games. But sometimes you also just trust your numbers, and my numbers were like, they aren't going to win a lot of games. This schedule looked difficult, at East Carolina. I think we'll get to them. I don't think either of us have a clue what's coming out of there. Houston, at SMU, Cincinnati, at USF, Tulsa, at Memphis. I mean, we talked about Houston not playing any of those teams. Essentially, Tulane has them all lined up.
Yep.
And then in non-conference, they have Oklahoma and Ole Miss. And I'm just like, this team is going to get battered. But if there's someone
UAB as well.
Yes. If there's someone I trust, Willie Fritz would be one where he can manufacture 5-6 wins. So I wouldn't bet on it, even if my numbers told me to take it. But that also just might be love for Tulane and Willie Fritz. Love the green wave. All right. Moving on. SMU.
Sonny Dykes.
I know, Sonny Dykes. I think this is the conference of coaches I love.
Yeah, I like a lot of the coaches in this conference.
The only one I don't like, I think, is Dana Holgerson, and they're the ones who I have being a sleeper through the whole thing. But SMU, 6 wins, sits on that weird 6-win mark. Once again, I think they'll be a good team on offense. Defense, I don't know. If it's solid, I think they go over that 6-win mark.
Yeah.
If it's poor, I think they could hit an under. I just didn't know where to sit. I gave them 7 wins, but this was my kindness. I was mean to Tulane, and I think I did the 2 back-to-back. I couldn't be mean to Tulane and SMU at the same time.
I'm actually right around that 7-8 win window. I think the big games to look at are at Louisiana Tech, at TCU, and at Memphis. I think they need to win 2 of those 3 to hit this over. It can be done, and I think that TCU game is going to be really good.
Yeah, that's always a fun one.
Big rivals there, but I'm going to trust in Sonny Dykes here. I think his system's running well. He's starting to get things together, bringing SMU back. Yes, and I think they're going to get the over.
Yeah, I went over. And like you, I think my over was based on them getting those 2 wins out of that little stretch and just really, really tough games. Mm-hmm. That back end's pretty hard too. At Houston, at Memphis, Central Florida, at Cincinnati, Tulsa. They need to win in the middle of the season because that back end, it might start a very bad waterfall down the train. And if you're trying to catch to those 6 wins at that point, every week is going to be a painful week for you because you're like, we don't get a break. But I just love Sonny Dykes on offense. I love watching their offense play. And if they can just get some solid play on the defensive end, I think they can get to that number. All right, moving on. We mentioned them a little earlier. What to do with East Carolina?
Well, this is another coach I like, Mike Houston. I think he's another really good offensive mind. I think their offense is going to be improved, but
we like them till they all go to the big time schools and then bomb out and have to come back.
I think they've got a really tough opener going. They host it's a neutral site. App State, and then South Carolina and at Marshall. So they could potentially start the year 0-3 right there. And then you've got an easy home game, Charleston Southern, but then you turn right around and got Tulane and UCF. You're looking at maybe 1-5 to start your first 6. So getting over that 5 is going to be really tough, especially when you've got at Houston and Temple and at Memphis and Cincinnati in your last 6.
Well, that's what
I
went over.
I'm really on the fence here. I'm going to go push or an under if I had to
Yes.
take. I think 4 to 5 wins is that window that they're going to
Yes.
fall in. They could surprise me. Like I said, I like Mike Houston. I like the way he runs his offense, but I don't know if they've got enough weapons to get it done.
I went over, and I will say I was being kind. I was giving them wins. I don't think they will.
Their offensive and defensive line, they need to find some consistency and get some strength there.
I was going to say, secondary wise, defensively, I think they can find, pieces to put it together and hold some of those poor teams. I'm a little nervous offensively, whether I do like Mike Houston, but they can find, room on offense versus, your Houstons, your Central Floridas, your Marshalls. That Marshall game just is like, why are you playing Marshall at Happy State in your non-conference? This would make this a lot easier if you were playing some really, really bad teams and other than, elite level teams. Those games will be fun to watch. I will admit, I'm excited to watch them.
It's probably the toughest non-conference schedule in the AAC.
Yes, I agree. And then they have a really tough conference schedule to go with it. I would not bet on the over. I went them over because I'm sort of projecting out that I think they might be better than they are, but I don't think that would be a good bet to bet on the over. Their schedule is tough. You don't totally know what the offense is going to look like until you see it. But it will be a fun watching to see what they do. All right. Moving on. Navy midshipmen here. I'm a little down on Navy this year. Wins at 3.5, and I actually went under. And speaking of tough schedules, theirs is very tough as well. And I couldn't. I think I was being kind and giving them 3 wins.
I think Navy's probably the worst military academy school this year.
Yes,
I don't see them getting very many wins, if any wins.
That's
on this schedule.
I truly the only game like I had to give them at Temple. And I think I gave them like East Carolina and stuff like that.
I don't think they get those.
You can't, I can't honestly say I think they're going to win that. I didn't want to be like, oh, I think Navy's going to go winless. So I was kind and was like, if they're humming, I think their peak might be 3 wins. And that's still under. So like I was talking about East Carolina, where I wouldn't do that bet. I think they only have 3 maximum wins on their schedule. I would bet Navy on the under here.
For sure. I'm not big on this team at all. I don't think they've got anything clicking, and it could be the last year for old Ken and coach.
Yeah, I know. I kind of
been there a long time.
Yeah, I know. I like Ken. He probably should have taken the bigger job when he was rolling with the Navy going undefeated. But anyway, I just don't think they have the talent to really match up this year. And those teams always struggle a little bit on defense. And if they don't have those explosive sort of skill position option guys, they begin to really have some trouble. All right, we'll move to South Florida. Jeff Scott's second year there. Their win total sits at 3.5. My comment is just okay to awful. I don't think they're quite there. They're in a very difficult conference, which isn't going to be kind to you to sort of work and feel things out. And their schedule is very difficult.
I've got 1 win on their schedule.
That's it.
I've got the beating Florida A&M at home, and that's it.
Yeah.
They maybe can sneak in, maybe at East Carolina or at Tulane.
That's what, much like Navy.
Yeah.
I gave them 3 wins, but that was saying they win all those sort of games where they match up. They could be hovering around 1, 2, like 3 wins would be a max out. I might have given them like a Tulsa home game, a Temple home game that they could sneak out. But honestly, speaking of teams that might start off like 1-7, other than FAMU, I don't think they're winning at NC State, Florida, at BYU, at SMU.
No.
Then they have Tulsa and then Temple. That's.
I mean, the only one I see them as favorites is Florida A&M.
Yes.
The others, there's some they have a chance in, but they're not favored in any.
By the time they get to Tulsa there, and if Tulsa's 4-4, something like that, they're going to be favored. South Florida will be 1-6, and you just don't know where their heads at.
Well, and then you got to get the kids.
Yes.
What's their motivation at that point?
So both Navy and South Florida, I think those would be very, very good bets on the under there because I like maxed out their wins and they were still coming on the under. And I think that's sort of the best way to bet on things. If you think a team maxes out on a number and they're still under it, I really, really would ride that. So I think Navy and South Florida just become the whipping boys of the AAC. And speaking of AAC whipping boys, Timble, 3 wins. Their O-line is good. That's about all I could say on them. They're sort of totally retooling from a good run, I'd say. And they've had probably about a 5-6 year good run. They were really bad last year, but
they had a lot of last second cancellations and rescheduling, and they were one of the teams that really struggled with COVID. And actually going back to Navy struggles, they had a really tough time too. And then weird decision not to tackle in practice. But I think Temple kind of caught a bit of the COVID bug, so to say, where it just really ruined their season. I don't think they necessarily talent-wise should have had as big of a drop-off as they did. So I've really got them hovering right around these 3 wins. I
pushed.
I think they can win it.
Of the bottom 3 teams that we just talked about, I think Temple's probably the best one.
Well, and their schedule's probably the most favorable.
And it's the kindest.
They've got Akron and Wagner. I think those are 2 wins you can go ahead and give them. So really, you're looking for one more to get the push.
And that's what I was talking about, those home games for Temple. I'm not joking. Those nooners, I think you found it out a couple times last year. But it's like, don't do that. They play in the Eagles Stadium. No one is there. It's noon. Half the people are not even awake. And all of a sudden, Temple's up 17-0, and you're trying to get back in the game in the fourth quarter when everything's finally waking up. But so I pushed right at 3.
Interesting to see that Rutgers game.
The Rutgers game
used to be Big East.
Yes. Well, Big East bad, but I think I worked my way to where they could maybe get to 4 wins, maybe if things broke really, really well. I wouldn't touch it, but of the teams on the bottom, I think this would be the one that has the best chance of
I think I would lean towards the over here, but I'm hovering right around that 3 line.
Also, their O-line is really good. I think their D-line could be better than it's thought to be. And, those Temple teams that have been good controlled both O and D lines. So if they can find that, they might be able to sneak a couple wins and go on this over on 3. All right. That's the AAC.
That's all of them.
Yeah. Let's get a champion out of the AAC. I'm curious. A lot of teams hovering around here.
Well, I already told you who the championship matchup.
Yes.
I think it's going to be UCF and Cincinnati.
Yeah.
I still like the value of Houston at the 1,400 to maybe get there. But if I had to pick 2 to be there, it's going to be UCF and Cincinnati. And I actually like UCF to win it all.
Do you like UCF?
I do.
I'm going to go throw Houston out there.
There you go.
As much as I dislike Dana Holgerson, he'll probably lose the last game to whoever they're playing, probably some horrible rival, SMU. Did they play Rice the last game of the season? I don't know. Somebody's going to come in there and upset them and screw me over. But I'm leaning towards Houston. But I really think Cincinnati, Central Florida, Houston, all really, really good teams. Should be a fun conference to watch.
Yep.
Be sure to join us next week.
Yep.
We're getting into the Pac-12 and the Mountain West. You know I love me some Mountain West football. Pac-12, I'm a little more iffy on, but I think you found you liked the Pac-12 last year.
Yeah, I think I've made a lot of picks in that conference.
Yes, I know. You're a Pac-12 junkie all of a sudden, but be sure to join us next week as we continue our preview series. We'll begin our NFL previews, AFC East, NFC East tomorrow with Achilles Reign. Be sure to watch us on the Green Light Network for all our shows. More and more content will come out as we get closer to the football season, soccer season about to kick off. How about that messy nose?
Make sure and subscribe to get notifications on all our new videos when they drop.
Definitely so. I'm Champ Chesterfield. This is Dynamite David. That's our show, and we're out.
Greenlight Network presents Football time.